Hello and welcome again to another plus-sized kite review. Today we are taking a break from looking at another primarily big air focused kite to try the self-described crossover slash freeride kite from Eleveight, the RS Plus V2. This is another demo kite provided by the team at Mac Kiteboarding, so if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description to their site. You should also check out their YouTube channel for opinions on all their gear in different conditions to what I usually ride, often lighter winds, with more focus on other freeride and wave kites and things like that. For those new to these reviews, I mainly look at the big air discipline, focusing on boosts, kite loops, and kite loop progression. Now I believe this is the first non-Alula 3-strut kite I've flown since my very first review, where I included the Naish Pivot and Reedon Supermodel V3. So I do feel like it's not quite fair on the Eleveight here to a lot of the kites, to compare it really to a lot of the kites I've ridden recently, being that most of them are specifically for big air. So you do have to factor that into my critiques in this review. From the brand Eleveight, if you are looking for a purely big air 5-strut high wind kite, I believe the XS is what you'd be looking for, and that's likely more my cup of tea for the style of riding I prefer these days. So I will try to get on one of those later this year. But all that said, I still actually had a really fun time on this kite in the sessions I did have. I only rode it in winds around the 22 to 28 knot mark, so the highest I was jumping and looping was around 10 to 15 meters, but I felt that wind range was certainly where I would enjoy this kite the most. In terms of feel, right away I was reminded a little bit from years past of my old duotone dice or North Pulse kites, but those were kites I did own around 3 to 4 years ago before I started doing these reviews and really thinking about it that much, or had any big air skills, to be perfectly honest. So take that comparison perhaps with a grain of salt. I am going to try to hit up a few more free ride slash crossover kites like this one in the near future, just for comparison purposes, and to be able to say with more confidence which models of this style of kite I do prefer in general and specifically for big air. Now, looking at this RS Plus, despite being quite light in terms of the actual weight of the kite, which I believe for the 9 meter comes in around 2.8 kg, I found the kite was still moderately heavy on the bar, so not too heavy like an XR or an Edge, but certainly not noticeably light like many of the other big air kites I've been on lately, for example the Harlem Force or Orbit Pro. It was fairly nimble to fly around the window, albeit a little bit skittish, particularly when the wind was picking up and it got gusty, but I never to a point during my session felt like I was out of control. I could see this being more challenging, however, when the winds really picked up, which is why I mentioned before I think this is the kind of wind range I like it in, but you would really expect that from a 3-strut with this shape. The brand promotes that it uses its new type of Dacron-esque fabric called Dynatex, which I'm sure is a lighter improvement than previous fabrics, although I haven't ridden any of its predecessors. My assumption when I sort of hear these new twists on Dacron from all the brands is that they're probably all very similar in terms of materials and manufacturing, and a lot of the different brands obviously are promoting things like that, be it the Ultra HT from Cabrina, the SLS from Duotone, or the NMAX from North. It's a slightly lighter and more robust Dacron-based kite, but still a tier or two below Alula, or potentially what Brainchild is pumping out for the Harlem kites with their variations of fabrics and manufacturing techniques. So, while riding this kite, I went through my usual routine. I did a few jumps to my strong side, a few loops, then I did some again in the other direction with a little less aggression, because I didn't feel quite as confident on this kite as I would some of the other ones I'm used to. As you would expect, this kite certainly didn't have the easily accessible lift or hang time that I've gotten used to with most of the purely bigger focused kites I've been riding for these reviews. But if you could time a good gust and get your timing just right, You could still jump very high with it, particularly if you were keeping the kite fairly active through the jump, I found. By that, I mean for bigger jumps, well-executed scent jumps are probably going to give you more lift than just parking this kite at 12. This means slowly passing it through 12 during the ascent as you rise, then before you hit the apex, moving the kite aggressively forward to catch any additional gusts along the way. I generally find the stronger the taper of the kite, e.g. a more bow shape, the more you can get away with just parking the kite up above you as you ascend, and that'll catch a lot of added lift and gusts. Whereas with kites like this, you need to really fight for that added lift. They're just not going to give them to you by default. This technique can also benefit big air kites as well, but they do tend to give you more free gifts in the form of lifty gust catching. As an example, back when my quiver was a combination of orbits and XRs, I found I needed to do these aggressive scent jumps when I was riding my orbits if I wanted to get a similar level of height as I would with my XR, which I could just park up above my head and would catch everything as I rose up. Now, in terms of hand time, again for the RS, not a lot here if you just park it to the side and hope to float down as you descend. So I really struggled to get board offs going, and it was pretty cold during these sessions because we're going into winter, so I gave up on even landing them after a few attempts. Frankly, if I was better or had the wind to go a lot higher more consistently, I think I would have been able to get them going. But just by putting the kite to the side, as I tend to usually do as I'm progressing now with them, I was just sort of plopping down into the water before I could get the board back on. I did have the same problem with the Harlem Force as I mentioned in that video. Once again, for hang time and old school tricks, this kite just isn't going to be the best choice out there, and it's going to make you work a little bit harder. But of course, a well-seasoned rider with a well-timed heli loop is going to get away with things that I can't. Loops-wise, this was a solid option for high and tight, low pull or low or high risk style looping. So it wouldn't be a bad option for people wanting to progress into loops. With the lack of natural lift, however, to have a smooth, easy catch, I found you did need to send it out a little wider so you could get a little bit more lift as you were coming in. This was, again, a little bit like the Harlem as well. So it would not be my personal preference for loop-related trick progression because of this factor. I didn't feel confident doing much with it other than straight loops during my time on it. Perhaps with a bit more riding, of course, I'd get that confidence factor up a bit more. Where this kite did certainly have a significant edge over most of the kites I've ridden lately is that, unsurprisingly, I felt like it would just be a better option for a wider variety of kite activities. So wave riding, perhaps foiling, even freestyle. I was tempted to try to unhook at times, but it's been quite some time since I have, especially on a 9-meter size, and to be honest, my freestyle was never good enough that I'd be unhooking in over 25 knots anyways. If I was on an 11-meter in around 20 to 22 knots, I think this would be a different story and it would have been fun to give it a go. I wish I was a bit more of a wave rider to be able to comment on that. The only time I've ever really ridden waves was in Mauritius, and you can check out that video on my channel of the kiting conditions there. But I can imagine this working fairly well there too. All in all, with its comparative deficiencies for big air, this kite certainly wouldn't be my choice as a purely big air option, but it does it well enough that I would be happy enough riding it if it was not my primary riding style and I wanted to do a lot of different things, or was in a location that didn't get a ton of wind. It would be an ideal kite for people who live in areas where you get a lot of 18 to 25 knot days, and you can do a bit of wave riding, a bit of freestyle, and still want to be able to throw some loops, particularly on your 10 or 11 meter size. I think they'd work for it, and it would still be decent enough to have a 9 if the kite picked up into the late 20s. In terms of scores, keep in mind these are based on big air riding, and they are long overdue for an upgrade. I came up with these for my first video a couple of years ago, so a kite that would have got a 7 or 8 then, you can assume is probably more like a 5 or 6 in comparison now, as the kites have progressed so much. Later this year, for my best of 24 wrap-up, I'll be coming out with a different system hopefully, so if you have any suggestions for how that should look, please comment below. After riding this really fun kite, I'm quite curious now what other crossover kites would be good to compare with this one, so please also drop a comment below which ones you'd like to see be reviewed, and I'll try and get a hold of them. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe, and for more regular updates on what I'm riding and working on next, check out my Instagram at Jason of Montreal. Until next time, goodbye.